Chapter 24. Incidental Music. Felix stood in his office, penning a score at the conducting desk. He glanced outside the window, where the chilled snow glowed in the twilight. With ideas forming, his pen flowed with ease on each leaf of manuscript paper. The writer's block had lifted, and his imagination flourished on the incidental music for A Midsummer Night's Dream. Out of King Frederick's commissions, the Shakespeare play yielded the most progress, due in part that the overture was completed years prior. The new parts were coming together beautifully. Felix found the project quite unique and intriguing. There had to be a balance between music and story, so he made sure to be especially specific when it came to the dynamics. If the music deemed too quiet, it was mere background to fill the void of the speaking voice. Too loud and the story would be drowned out. It was more about letting the music submerge the listener into the land of pixies and sprites. At the same time, it therefore made spoken poetry an instrument of its own, working in harmony with the orchestra. Sometimes the music paused depending on context, so Felix practiced through the play at the clavier to line things up. It was to be in the original English, as well as translated to German, so it took time in that aspect. On the first notice of the finished product, His Majesty wanted the Midsummer Night's Dream presented at the new palace in Berlin. The engagement would be the intended means of moving Felix and his family out of Leipzig. Though Felix knew he had no choice, Cecil downright disagreed with the whole matter. She spoke with her arms crossed. "We cannot leave our home behind. There must be a way to convince His Majesty. Darling, I've done all I can. It is a bit hard to convince royalty without being offensive. I am to find someone to fill the position at the Gewandhaus." Felix felt a pain in his heart in hearing his own words. "How can you think of giving up the position that you love so much? We are so happy here. The children are well here. Is there any way out of this?" "I don't see a way out. This is the instruction of the king," Felix sighed hopelessly. Cecil pleaded, "At least give the job to Herr David." "I will ask him," Felix assured. "I don't know," I sighed, leaning back into my chair. Felix became exasperated as he sat in my parlor after asking me to take his position. He begged, "You are the one I most trust. I intend to be back. As soon as I fulfill my promises to the king, I'll be back, and that concerto will be ready for a premiere by then, and—" Felix bitte. I silenced his ramblings. He hushed, and I continued with my honesty. "I do not think I am suited for your job. I am comfortable as concertmaster, and I wish not to compromise my position." Felix gave another somber sigh, not knowing what to do. He set his coffee down and stood up to leave. I felt a pang of guilt, so suggested, "Why don't you contact Herr Hiller on the subject?" "I could try, but he and his wife reside quite comfortably in Frankfurt." Felix grabbed his coat and left it at that. I continued sipping my coffee, pondering the whole situation. My wife Sophie joined me for quality time. Meanwhile, in haste, Felix went home to write a letter. When entering his office, little Carl was at his desk, messing with the inkwell, splotching the pen over a thankfully blank manuscript. "Carl, what are you doing here?" "Papa, Mama said I could write music." Carl dotted random notes on a staff, his arms covered in sticky black ink. He dipped the pen back in the inkwell, but bumped it with his hand, tipping it off the desk. The little boy groaned as the staining liquid flowed onto the carpet. He turned to his father's tapping foot. Felix had his hands on his hips. A long silence commenced. "Papa, I'm sorry." Little Carl set the pen down. Felix sternly pointed towards the door. Carl stood and obeyed, but before he left, Felix grabbed his arm, halting him. He held his hand up to give discipline. Carl, in an instant, clenched his eyes shut, knowing what was to come. Felix halted a minute as he felt a reminiscence of his own father within him. He had not been to such a point with his child. "Carl," Felix calmed his tone and loosened his stance. Carl looked up to Felix in fright and whispered, "Yeah, Papa?" "Go to your room for the rest of the day. You shall not have dessert after supper," he firmly stated. Karl didn't moan or groan. He quietly listened and went to his room on his own. Johann came by the office and noticed the mess on the floor. "Oh dear, I'll go to the market to get something to clean that." "Danke," Felix nodded, while grabbing a rag to sop up some of the ink. He then sat at his desk, with fresh letter paper. The manuscript Karl scribbled, Felix set aside to save it. He still thought the attempt was cute. To continue with business, Felix began writing to Hiller, requesting he take the position as director of the Gewandhaus. It was a hard task to shape words for the request. Each line of the pen felt like a blade to his heart. He did not want to give up directing at the Gewandhaus, but forced his hand to write otherwise to Hiller. Little did he know, the new year of 1843 was to compromise their lifelong friendship. At the St. Thomas Church, weeks later, I joined Felix to attend a performance of the Oratorio Samson. We stood in the lobby while the crowd around us streamed into the main hall. Felix had his arms crossed in nervousness. I glanced at the clock and mentioned in our waiting, "This should be a nice concert to attend before you leave Leipzig." "I guess." Felix had pangs of sadness in his voice. He suddenly fell into a doze. I looked up to where his gaze settled to see Herr Hiller coming our way. He had agreed to come to take Felix's position at the Gewandhaus. This concert was a little something for us to spend time together before Felix was to make his leave. Without a word, we carried on into the church hall and found seating in a center pew. Felix sat between Hiller and I. He turned to me in small talk, but kept silent otherwise. Hiller minded his own business, waiting for the concert to commence. I couldn't help but notice the slight gene developed between them. Felix had a pang at seeing the man who was to fill his position he so loved and gave up so willingly. Hiller sensed the change in his once close friend, who now had a melancholy towards him. Their feelings lasted throughout the whole evening of the oratorio. The next day I headed to the hotel where Hiller took a temporary stay. With me was a young 11-year-old violinist named Joseph Joachim. He was an excellent musician and already had high skill at the violin. He looked up to the musicians of the Gewandhaus such as I, but mostly to Felix. In the moment, I was taking the young child to meet Herr Hiller, but a worry came when I found Felix and Hiller speaking with coffee in the hotel lobby. I feared Felix's mood to be soured, but in joining them, the uncomfortable sensation between the two disappeared. Another guest seemed to distract from the matter. Sitting across the way, on a couch, was the young Danish composer Niels Gade. He greeted Joachim and I in all kindness. Young Joachim, of course, greeted Felix in his usual excitement. Felix had the boy sit beside him, and they spoke of all sorts of things. Joachim couldn't have felt happier, but did not have a guess that Felix would be going away. Any sadness was hidden with talk and smiles. "We should go out somewhere today. This is a lively group." Hiller looked at his surrounding friends. I suggested, "Why don't we go to the theater this evening? There are a few stage plays going on." "After that, we could supper together in my rooms," Hiller added. Everyone stood to go on the outing. Joachim stuck to Felix as if he were his papa. Through the whole time of attending a few plays, the mood of our group was well, a vast difference from the bitter air the evening prior. When we returned to Hiller's hotel room for supper, everyone gathered at the small table. The food was simple, consisting of bread, an assortment of cheeses and wine. Hiller spoke after gulping down a serving of wine. "I am happy to say that my wife will be joining me in a few days, after I purchase a new place here in Leipzig." "Is she happy to come?" I asked. Hiller nodded. "She can't wait." Felix was too busy talking to Joachim to pay attention to the conversation. Rather, he was purposely ignoring such talk, until Niels asked Felix, "Isn't it nice that Frau Hiller will be in the city?" "I am exceedingly happy for Herr Hiller." Felix turned from Joachim in high spirits. I sensed Felix's real mood through his positivity. Hiller did as well, knowing he was truly anxious over the matter. Later in the week, Hiller made his first meet with the Gewandhaus Orchestra. I took my seat with Joachim close by as my shadow. He wanted to be a concertmaster in his future. Soon after the rest of the musicians seated, Felix stood before the orchestra somberly, announcing, "My dear friends, as you may have heard, I must leave Leipzig for a while. In that time, you shall have a new director." He gestured Hiller to the conducting desk. A few members of the orchestra gasped, including young Joachim beside me. The talk of our circle of friends didn't give hint to him of Felix's leave. His heart broke to pieces in seconds. "This is Ferdinand Hiller, a very good composer, and he will be a suitable director," Felix introduced. He then went to the piano as Hiller flipped through the scores. I announced to the orchestra, "We shall rehearse Felix's G minor concerto. He'll perform that for his last concert here. Though it is my duty to conduct the concertos, I am allowing Hiller to conduct, to give him a welcome." I looked to Felix with a nod. Hiller held up his hands and counted in. After rehearsals, Felix returned home, tired and worn. He couldn't wait to get into lounging attire and go to bed. Cecil questioned him as he walked by the dinner table. "Are you going to bed before supper?" "I'm quite exhausted." Felix headed to the bedroom. Cecil followed, grabbing a note. "This letter came today from Herr Bendemann, the artist. He is having a gathering tonight at his house. Clara Schumann and you are to play music. You must eat before you go." "At least let me nap." Felix flopped in bed, instantly falling into slumber. Cecil let him sleep the 15 minutes before Johann finished setting the table. Felix got up feeling somewhat refreshed. When eating, he made capital work of his meal, then headed out on the next engagement. Bendemann's home bustled with guests. The artist welcomed Felix, guiding him to the piano. Clara stood nearby, holding a glass of wine, as if she were taking a break. Felix sat at the keys and began Beethoven's Appassionata. The guests gathered around to catch the sweet tones. At the end of the Andante, he let the final chord of the diminished seventh ring on for a time, as if he wanted to impress it forcibly on all present. He turned to Clara. "You must play the final." "9. "Felix, seriously? You finish it." She near choked on her sip of wine. Everyone waited with the diminished seventh over their heads, anticipating the final. The unresolved discord moved Clara to the piano. The end of the sonata was worthy of the beginning. Felix had much enjoyment with his circle of friends, yet life in Leipzig was soon coming to a halt. On the 1st of October, Felix's farewell concert was held at the Gewalthaus. People packed the auditorium. I took my seat with the other musicians close to follow. Felix sat in all grace at the piano, while Hiller entered to take his spot at the conducting desk in all professionalism. There was no hesitation for the music to start. As soon as every musician had their instrument set, Hiller counted in. It was a wonder watching Felix put so much heart into his playing in the moment. He glanced at Hiller every so often, but kept his mind towards the voice of his instrument. I rather noticed Felix's eyes gleam with regret. He didn't want to leave the Gewalthaus, so savored every note he touched. Hiller stood proud and conducted as if he could not wait for Felix to be out of the picture. After the concerto's end, the audience applauded with a roar. Felix stood and bowed. When the rest of the musicians bowed, Felix glanced back at me. I saw a tear exit his eye before he walked off. He left the stage without any handshakes, as he was too saddened to give farewells. Felix headed for the exit, as he didn't want to be in Hiller's way when the dispersing crowd gave their congratulations to the new director. In the lobby, young Joachim came across Felix and tugged at the back of his coat, stopping his fast leave. Felix turned to the boy, who was in tears, asking, "You aren't really leaving Leipzig, are you?" "I'm sorry, but I must. I hope to come back, but that I cannot tell. Stick to Herr David. You will learn a lot from him." Felix gave Joachim an embrace, then headed for home. It was going to be a long night, as his family was to pack for the early morning train. He thought he would have had more time, but between letters from Paul and Herr Mossau, in concern to the king's demands, Felix smelt a rat and decided to set off on the first train to Berlin the next day. Cecil had a head start in gathering their belongings. Johann helped the children pack. Felix walked into the house to his children in a state of confusion. Little Carl cried, while Marie had excitement in thinking they were going on a road trip. Young Paul and Felix Jr. were indifferent. They were too young to understand what was happening. Carl's upset emotions worried Felix, so he sat down with the child. "What is the matter?" "I don't want to be away from you," he sniffled. Felix explained. "We are leaving together. I'm not leaving you." "That's not what Mama says. She says you are going to Berlin, and we are visiting Grandma Lizzie." He poured his tears onto Felix's lap. Felix gently moved him aside to stand and went to the bedroom where Cecil was packing. "Explain why Carl thinks I'm leaving you and the children. I'm not going to live in Berlin. The king is going to waste your time again. When there is nothing left to do in Berlin, I expect you to come to Frankfurt." She kept packing. Felix ran his fingers through his hair. She then explained, "Our train leaves in the afternoon, so I expect that you'll be gone by the time I wake." "Yeah, but I'm sure the king wants us to have a life in Berlin eventually." "He wants you to make a life there. He doesn't truly care about your family." Cecil finished a suitcase, then flopped into bed, adding, "Johann is coming with the children and I." She shut her eyes to sleep. Felix sighed, packing a suitcase, then leaving the rest for the morning. He tucked the children in their beds, then headed back to the bedroom to get a good night's rest himself. Before the dawn or rattling of carriages, Felix rose out of bed. After a morning wash and fresh outfit, he fully woke himself by fetching a spot of coffee. He gathered the last of his luggage while Cecil peacefully kept in her dreams. Before Felix left the bedroom, he kissed his wife tenderly. She stirred awake and kissed back, quite intensely, but huddled back to sleep. Felix then went to the children's room and gave them kisses. Marie, Paul, and Felix Jr. kept out like blown candles. Little Carl managed to stir awake. He clung to his papa, hugging his neck. Felix kissed him, then gently pried his hands away. Carl cried hopelessly while watching his father go. Johann met Felix in the dining area, giving a farewell. This was yet another hard leave to Berlin. Felix headed out into the dark morning and found a carriage to take him to the train station. The locomotive was rolling in at the hour. Felix went to the ticket booth to purchase his pass to Berlin. A few others were in line for the early train. The whistle blew, indicating the time to board. The scent of steam filled the air, burning Felix's nose. A mix of oil and grease were added to the stench. As Felix headed towards a boxcar, he felt nervous with the modern means of travel. The train jerked as the brakes were soon to be let up. It whistled once more. Felix put all second thoughts behind and stepped on. The locomotive chugged away. The wheels screeched much when turning. Once moving straight forward, it sped up to get to Berlin in capital timing. Instead of days, in a carriage, the trip would be hours. The dark morning soon transformed into a light afternoon of gray clouds, bright with a mist. He glanced out the window, every now and again, watching the fields pass by quickly in view. As the train continued to chug, the piston scraped against the tracks. Felix wasn't sure if he favored going by carriage in the context of the moment. Each passing minute was taking him closer to the city he desired not to see. He couldn't change his mind now. There was no stopping the train. Life didn't slow down. Felix happened upon a newspaper to read. It had many articles to keep him occupied. The long paragraphs finally gave his eyes a dreariness with the passing hours. Slowly he dropped it onto his lap to drift into a dream. It seemed to start pleasant, like floating on air with the train's whistle puffing clouds of smoke. He soon began to recollect over everything and everyone. Hiller's happiness of going to Leipzig was a sting to Felix's emotions. It gave him worry as he hoped to get his position back once he returned. Being separated from Cecil and the children gave another angst of anxiety. He pictured little Carl's desperate face each time his papa left him. Cecil's bewitching blue eyes full of tears gave another torment. On the other hand, the worst wrench in his mind were the demands of King Frederick. The king's orders began blaring in his head, along with the screeching train whistle, giving him a migraine. He wanted the train to turn around, but it couldn't slow down. The engine chugged faster and faster. Felix's dream veered into a surreal fear of the boxcar swaying on an unstable bridge. In reality, Felix leaned against the window, but in his wakeful mind, the cold glass felt like a gust of wind. The dream went back into the floating feeling, but it didn't last as it turned into a falling dream. Just before his brain anticipated the ground, he jumped awake in a fright to the whistle scream, declaring it had arrived at its destination. He grabbed his bags and rushed out into Berlin. His first stop was the bank house, where he found Paul. Their Uncle Joseph still resided there as well. It felt nice to be around family, but bitter at the same time as Leah was now gone. Felix and Paul went to the living room for some coffee and to catch up. They first discussed the main house of Leipziger Strasse No. 3. "I have found a family interested in the estate," Paul informed. "Before I close the sale on it, I'd like to make sure you were all right with it." "I am all right with it. There are many precious memories there, but I don't see my family and I owning it. It is better for it to have a new family to enjoy it. Who's the family? Boeth. I believe they will take care of it, Paul assured. Felix then confessed to Paul. I was wondering, I wish not to be intrusive, but I need a place to stay, if it's not too much for you. Otherwise I could ask Fanny and Wilhelm. Why don't I organize something for you? I know Fanny and Wilhelm are quite busy these days, and this house has much commotion with business. I'll get you a room at the best hotel in Berlin. Paul handed him money. Danke, Felix accepted, but felt rather that Paul didn't want to deal with him. His brother slyly added, Be sure to be on the lookout for apartments. I hear there are many decent ones for a family of 6. Don't count on it, Felix replied wryly. He made his leave of the bank house to go find the hotel. It was settled in a well-to-do neighborhood with nice accommodations. After getting a room and relaxing, Felix deemed the hotel to be his favorite. Though it was clean and modest, it still felt nothing like being with family. Felix laid in bed and longed for his parents, as well as heartfelt quality time with his siblings. 8 days after settling, a letter from King Frederick came, summoning him to the palace. Felix hoped it was for a real conversation, not a mere dinner request. When he came to the palace, Felix's hopes crumbled as the servant escorted him towards the dining hall. There, at the foot of the long table, sat His Majesty and Herr Massau. King Frederick had a lavish dinner plate before him, while Massau had a pile of papers. On the other side of the king, across from Massau, was another lavish plate of cheese and sausage, accompanied by wine. Felix, come sit. I do hope you are hungry. I know you like wine, so I paired the finest cheeses and meats with it. Frederick pointed to the seat. Felix walked the way and sat down. Rather than eat, he watched Massau scribble signatures on various documents. The king ate grapes and fine bread. He looked to Felix. Go on, eat. We have much to discuss. I can't have you talking on an empty stomach. Felix grazed at the different cheeses, trying each kind. Herr Massau began business. These are the new documents concerning concerts and pay that His Majesty would like you to sign. He handed Felix a pen. Felix looked at each one with caution and didn't sign anything he deemed impractical. The king explained his main request. I want the Midsummer Night's Dream premiered at the new palace. I have an orchestra and choir at my disposal. They will grant you 11 rehearsals beforehand. The performance is to be on the 14th of October. Sounds sufficient enough. Felix finished his wine. By the time his plate had been emptied, the meeting ended. Felix then ventured off to meet with the orchestra. The musicians and actors rehearsed in the auditorium of the new palace to get a sense of the acoustics. They adapted quickly to Felix's conducting. Each performer was top-notch and chosen well. It surprised Felix that something concerning music had progressed in Berlin. At the same time, not a word of the academy was said. Felix knew nothing was moving forward in that aspect. The extravagant orchestra and professional stage actors were to entice Felix to stay. It was tempting, as he felt his music flowing together. On the train to Berlin, Hiller, Gade, Joachim, and I were on our way to surprise Felix by coming to the premiere of The Midsummer Night's Dream. We laughed and had a party in the boxcar, excited to see how Felix was holding up. We knew he wasn't fond of the city, so we thought our visit would cheer him. When arriving at the new grandiose palace, everyone in attendance wore their best. We had appropriate attire, even young Joachim. His fine little suit made him feel proper. I couldn't help but chuckle as he stood with confidence and posture. He had the most anticipation to see Felix once again. I hoped to find Felix beforehand, but the crowded audience flowed towards the auditorium, forcing our group to follow. We seated in a balcony of the pearly hall containing a stage. King Frederick could be seen on the ground floor, along with the rest of the court. He sat in all properness, speaking to a correspondent beside him. When the modern furnishing of gas-lighting dimmed, the stage was illuminated. I noticed the king's expression brighten as he watched Felix enter the orchestra pit. Everything in the moment was as the king wanted, a shiny new palace and good music to attract the likes of the court. When everything was set, Felix counted into the overture. Everyone recognized the flute's windful chords and captivating tones. It gave them the anticipation to hear the whole play. The fresh music after the overture gave the utmost enchanting incidental accompaniment to Shakespeare's lines. The actors performed capitally, though the lovely and popular actress Charlotte von Hagen would have been more in her sphere in a drawing-room or ballet than as the elfin Ariel. Everything regarding performance was to Felix's wishes. The comic scenes were amusing, and the whimsical parts most poetic. The entr'actes were played without any pause whatsoever. It was indispensable for proper effect. A long pause was introduced in the middle of the performance, to offer refreshments to the people belonging to the court. It caused a half-hour to be taken up with loud talking and moving about while others were quiet. The whole scenario portrayed disrespect to art and Felix's ideals. Nevertheless, the play carried on after the court got their break. I couldn't help but find intriguing aspects with each piece. The overture was recapped and recycled throughout various passages. From the flute's wind to the donkey's calls, the ending gave the utmost satisfaction. Along with the flute, the narration went as so. Through the house give glimmering light, by the dead and drowsy fire, every elf and fairy sprite, hope as light as bird from briar, and this ditty after me, sing and dance it trippingly. First rehearse your song by rote, to each word and warbling note, hand in hand with fairy grace, will we sing and bless this place. Above all, even the great Shakespeare verses, the incidental music alone would be enough to stamp Mendelssohn as one of the cleverest of tone masters. Though his late father would be rolling in his grave, Felix's muse flourished in the world of sprites. The phrases of violins tickled the nerves in tone. It affected Felix, giving him spurts of energy as he conducted. The voices of the chorus beautifully resonated, as if transforming the scene of the stage into a real land of fairies. Shakespeare's plays were solid on their own, but without such music, the listeners would have been captivated in a much different sense. Among the ladies in song, a soprano stood out in a solo. Her voice floated over all other melodies with her graceful lines of I turned to Joachim, who appeared ever so transfixed. The eyes of his boyish face showed the glimmer of what he saw in the music. Each note contributed to a scene of purple blossoms beside a sparkling blue lake in the glow of the moon. For myself, I had the most intrigue for the violin phrases that came forth, giving the sparkle to the sprites. Hiller and Gade were watching Felix's conducting for the majority of the performance. They were fascinated by the musical context and what the musicians mimicked. Whether it was a twinkle of a pixie, an elf or elfin, or the call of a burrow, it all had a part in the composition. I glanced down towards the front row seats on the ground floor. The royal court watched in their usual manner, the ladies waving their fans, moving about with a feather or so in their hair. The gentlemen sat, appearing bored as ever, whether they truly were or not. King Frederick watched in happiness, but often whispered his opinions to the royal beside him. It couldn't be heard from afar, but Felix, being only a few feet in front of him, became annoyed with the stirs of rich people. Once the interlude of the chorus faded down, the actor at the head of the stage stepped forward, ready to speak his next lines. The flutes entered again. Now, until the break of day, through this house each fairy stray, to the best bride bed will we, which by us shall blessed be, and the issue there create ever shall be fortunate. So shall all the couples three ever true and loving be, and the blots of nature's hand shall not in their issue stand. Nevermore hair lip, no scar, no mark prodigious such as are despised in nativity shall upon their children be. With this field do consecrate, every fairy take his gate, and each several chamber bless through this place with sweet peace, and the owner of it bless ever shall in safety rest. Trip away, make no stay, meet me all by break of day. The music fell into another interlude once more, in which was slow and sweet. It felt all too soon for the play to come to a close, but everything had to come to such a point eventually. The next great lines ended the music for the night. If we shadows have offended, think but this, and all is mended, that you have but slumbered here, while these visions did appear, and this weak and idle theme, no more yielding but a dream. Gentles, do not reprehend. If you pardon, we will mend. And, as I am an honest puck, if we have unearned luck, now scape the serpent's tongue, we will make amends ere long, else the puck a liar call. So good night unto you all. Give me your hands if we be friends, and Robin shall restore amends. After the clapping of the court and commoners, Felix turned and bowed. Every other performer followed. Frederick William walked the few feet to the orchestra pit, telling Felix in excitement, "My dear Felix, with this work, we must soon have the next plays performed. Your music is the best Berlin has to offer." "I'll see what can be done." Felix had an air of annoyance. It was obvious, especially around the other members of the court, that the king treated him as his pet. Felix didn't want to stay in the city based on the fact he was a favorite of the king. A duchess came up and assured Felix, "I can't wait to come back and hear more." She curtsied, then left with her duke. The comment made Frederick all the more eager. Felix braced himself as Frederick gripped him at the shoulders, livingly stating, "You shall have to get the next one done right away." "As I said, I will see what I can do." Felix bowed slightly. Frederick smiled once more, then trotted away with his party. Felix gave a sigh, standing alone in the pit. He then looked up at the thinning audience. Out of them, he spotted his group of friends, so sprinted off to catch up in the lobby. "Herr David!" Felix spotted me first. Young Joachim jumped with excitement and hugged Felix. Niles, Hiller, and I gathered around. After greetings, Hiller suggested, "Let's go out to dinner." "Where to?" Niles asked. "We can go to Potsdam and have dinner at the Einsiedler," Felix pointed out. Everyone agreed and took a carriage there. At the restaurant, our table was lively with food and drink. We spoke much about the concert. Felix for the most part seemed satisfied and pleased, yet mentioned, "I was quite enraged by that break for the court. It was a waste of a half hour. I felt it was a disregard of artist consideration." "But it still went fine," I stated. Felix shrugged in irritation. Joachim assured Felix, "That music was the best. It outweighs any antics of those needy nobles." "Danke," Felix quietly answered. Hiller finished his plate last, then stated, "I guess we had better be heading back to Leipzig. There's much work to do." "You have that right," I commented. Then, turning to Felix, the expression on his face became somber, especially towards Hiller. Hiller had the air of knowing the soured relation between them. Things might have smoothed over had not Felix been called to Berlin. After a quick shake of the hand, Hiller headed out. Gade gladly offered a healthy shake. Joachim sighed much, not wanting to leave Felix behind. Lastly, I gave my goodbyes. Felix had a few tears and told me plainly, "I am going to do all I can to be anywhere but here." "You will be back at the Gewalthaus soon. We still have a violin concerto to premiere." I grabbed my bag, then joined my group. Felix stayed at the table, lonely and sad. After the success of the Midsummer Night's Dream, King Frederick was overly anxious to have the next commissions finished. To make things harder, he added new ones into the list. In the course of a fortnight, Frederick wanted presented at the palace Athalia, Antigone, Edmondes, and Medea. Felix frantically wrote music for Athalia, having it done in a few days, as Frederick wanted that one immediately. Yet typical of the king, the concert never happened that soon. In reality, the other plays would not get finished as promised. There wasn't enough time nor motivation. To lighten his load, Felix refused the commission for Edmondes. He knew it would upset the king ever so, but he didn't know what else to do. Herr Massau returned the book for Felix, then wrote up a report on him for refusing. When presenting the news, Frederick sulked in irritation. "Does Felix know that he has hurt my feelings?" He believes that this alone can't be put to music, but the whole trilogy would require much more time, Marcel explained. That would be all the better, but it could not prevent Mendelssohn composing for the Amondes, which in itself may be regarded as a splendid whole. Frederick sounded in deeper remorse. Marcel didn't know what to say, but jumped as His Majesty abruptly hissed, "This affair is not over. I refuse to drop it. He shall compose for me as he is my subject. I shall be sure he continues to be a loyal subject." "Why don't you give the work to another artist? At least for this one, I think Felix may need a break from your commissions," Marcel loosely suggested. "I know you want Felix to do it, but if you want it done, there are many eager artists who would take a commission from the king." "I'll think it over." Frederick gestured Marcel to leave. Outside the room, Herr Tick was in the corridor, catching bits of the drama. As soon as Marcel came out and shut the door behind him, Tick asked, "Is the king's precious musician being disobedient?" "He is starting to refuse work," Marcel sighed. "It will only pain the king more once I get around to telling him that he also refused to compose songs for Wie es Juch gefällt. I am going to confront Felix. It is not like him to refuse so much." Tick hurried out of the palace. Marcel followed. "I shall come as well." They both headed for the hotel. When they found Felix's room, they knocked. Felix answered and let them in, not speaking a word. He sat at the dining table where Music in Progress sat. Marcel asked without intent, "Have you been working the hours away?" "Ja," Felix rested his head on his arm as he fumbled with his pen. Tick then spoke up with worry. "Why are you choosing to displease the king? Why are you refusing commissions?" "I need time to elapse between the midsummer. He has commissioned a lot," Felix huffed. Marcel suggested, "At least write for the Amondes. The king is deeply saddened with you. You have time, so your excuse is insufficient. You cannot annoy the king too horribly, as he loves you far too much. Yet I don't want trouble to arise. The Amondes is too difficult and impractical to organize for chorus and orchestra. For me, at least. I can make an attempt to solve this problem by suggesting someone else to do it." He spoke his truth. Marcel ran his fingers through his hair. "The king wishes to stay in good standing with you. Well then, I should go speak with him to get things straight. I'd rather be honest on my feelings of everything going on in Berlin. All of these grandiose academy plans, none of which are coming together." Felix stood and put on his coat. Herr Marcel and Tick followed him. At the palace, the king was surprised to see Felix pay a visit. When he walked in, Frederick cheered, "My Felix, what brings you? Have you finished anything? Herr Marcel tells me you have refused a commission. It does pain me to hear that." "It is true," Felix stood in all politeness. "I find your demands too hard." What an absurd thing to hear from the mouth of a musician. The king stood in disappointment. He walked up to Felix to face him. Felix felt a heart-stopping tension, but managed to speak kindly. "I have other priorities. If you want me to speak in truth, my family is staying in Frankfurt, and I wish to be with them. I am not apt on staying here. I have a name that could replace me. You would find sufficient means of what you want done, music-wise and academy-wise." "Bitte, my dear one, whenever you are here, you always speak of leaving, as if you're trying to escape a danger. I assure you, I am no threat to you. You are too precious of a subject to harm. No other could replace your capabilities. I find it hard to believe you found a man to replace yourself." "I have. His name is Herr Naumann. A perfectly fine musician." Felix bowed politely. Frederick smiled at his gentlemanly demeanor, but tried to be more convincing. "Your brother Paul won't be happy with what you are doing to my requests. This Herr Naumann is not you, therefore cannot compose like you. I wanted the trilogy of Amagon, Chopin, and Amondes done, but you are refusing to do one. Leave my brother out of this. He does not have any rule over my choices. I cannot promise 3 plays if I deem one impossible. I speak in truth and honesty again. I have been in turmoil trying to figure out your confusing demands." "You confuse me." The king's tone became rough. He grabbed Felix by the jaw. "You are an excellent composer that I deem good enough to fulfill my wishes. Yet you say you can't. I mean to be your friend, but now I don't know. Your speech is quite absurd, as if you do not care that you are speaking to His Majesty." Maybe if you were more reasonable, then I'd get more done. Felix's mouth began spewing his thoughts. Frederick told him in bluntness, "If you keep going with this attitude, I will have to impose my authority as king." He gave a grisly glare. Felix calmed down a few notches, then spoke softly. "How about I get the rest of Antigone done while I am in Frankfurt? I'll send it as soon as it's finished. Herr Naumann can do the rest of your commissions." "Fine. Maybe it's best that you go." The king roughly let him off. Right away, Felix went back to his hotel, packed, and took the next coach to Frankfurt. He didn't visit his siblings before his leaving, as he didn't want to hear their disapproval of the matter. As the coach neared Naumburg, the decent July weather calmed Felix's mood, so he penned letters giving his siblings farewells. For Paul, he worked on a painting he titled The Young Frau. It had been in progress since their trip to Switzerland yesteryear ago. He hadn't had time to finish it. The memory of the place was still fresh in his mind, but it didn't always come out on the canvas. He had to wash out the forest a second time, as he wanted to get it right. When the carriage rolled closer to Frankfurt, Cecil sent notice, informing that the family was settled in a home in Soden, near Frankfurt. Felix felt much relief to find a quaint wood house on the outskirts of town, giving it country air. Right when stepping out of the carriage with his luggage, his children screamed, "Papa!" Little Carl Emery sprinted out the front door. Young Paul clumsily followed behind. Cecil came, holding Felix Jr. After being tackled with hugs by his children, Felix entered the house. Johann took his coat and luggage, assuring, "I have a plate of food for you. Your family ate already, but I made sure there was some left." Danke, Felix was ever so thankful to have a trustworthy servant. His famished state caused him to wolf down the full serving of beef and potatoes. After that, he went to bed for a hard rest. With the rubbish of Berlin behind him, Felix had the most peace at home in Soden. Each day he rose out of bed at 6 after having 9.5 hours of sleep. Early strawberries were available for breakfast to accompany coffee. The morning hours were most enjoyable when sitting by the open window, watching the children play in the garden with dear Johann. During the crisp afternoons, Felix found apple trees and huge oaks to lay under. Sometimes a man from a nearby farm drove his swineherd, disturbing his relaxation. As he napped after getting a fill of rich pears and apples, one of the pigs ventured away from the herd. It decided to graze beside Felix. It snorted into his ear while horking on grass. Felix sat up and called to the farmer, "Bitte, go elsewhere with your animals." The man listened, gathering his hogs away, causing the stray one to follow. Felix sassily turned over in the grass to get cozy, continuing his rest, that is, until little Carl rushed to his father. "Papa, please play." He ran around the yard with Marie. Felix stood and stretched, then joined in their game of tag. Cecil stood nearby with a canvas, painting. Felix couldn't cease to rejoice at the sight of his healthy family. Cecil especially looked well, tanned by the sun without the least trace of former indisposition. He paused in playing and went to her. The canvas had a beautiful scenic landscape of the blue hills with the winding Main and Rhine. Felix admired his wife and her talents. He then gazed towards the children, who were in health with a tan from their days in the garden. Each day continued with lunch at 2 o'clock, to finish with dinner at 8, leading to bedtime at 10. In the entirety of the season, Felix never felt so much as himself. Every Saturday the family went to town for the markets. The confectioner sold thread and shirt buttons, in which Felix needed to mend a few of his linens. Cecil enjoyed browsing the fabrics for future dresses and clothes for the children. Outside the thread shop, little Paul ran towards a group of women who were selling cherries. The 4-year-old always made a bargain on the fruit. The women selling them thought he was the cutest child and couldn't help but give him a few. Meanwhile, Felix enjoyed a stand where punch was sold and drank. After the market, it was time to go back home. The children continued their play outside, while Felix and Cecil had sweet strawberries at the dining table. Cecil took up the newspaper to read. Felix gazed out the window, feeling a sense of peace while watching the children frolic the green grass. He turned back to Cecil and mentioned, "I wrote to my sister Fanny. I invited her to come here for a fortnight. She should be here tomorrow." "Oh, nice," Cecil smiled, sipping water. It was fresh from the Asmanschau spring. She stood. "I'll be sure there is a bed for her." She left to make arrangements. The next day, Fanny arrived in the early afternoon. She came in time for lunch. Felix was in the utmost joy at her presence. Almost right away they began discussing composition together. Fanny shared her work and Wilhelm's sketches. Felix looked at them with awe. Wilhelm must be so proud to have such a talented wife, and you proud of him. I mean to ask, when you return home, can you send me that organ piece I composed for your wedding? A publisher wants me to put together a collection of organ music. Of course. But you left Berlin in such haste. Paul is in a rut about your leaving. Why don't you come back to get your music? I have made my decision to stay out of Berlin long term. Besides, soon I must go to Zweibrücken for a festival. After that, I am making my next trip to Britain. London, of course. I've also been invited to Dublin to be presented a doctorate at the university there. Oh, so now my brother is to be Dr. Mendelssohn. She gave a joking tone. Felix chuckled, then begged, when you return home, please have Sebastian write. I'd love a letter from him. Of course, Fanny nodded. In April of 1844, Felix set off on his next trip to England. Cecil and the children stayed in Soden, as it seemed too much of a hassle. The ordeal of him going to Britain reached the ears of Berlin society. They thought it very wrong that Felix decided to go there instead of compose for King Frederick. Felix didn't care about such drama and felt his happy self when visiting the Mocelli's family at Chester Place, arriving on the 8th of May. Right away, Felix was received enthusiastically in London society with conducting and composing. Among concerts, he took part in a performance with Ignaz and Thalberg in Bach's Triple Concerto. Also young Joseph Joachim, who was now 13 years of age and an outstanding violinist, made his way to London for a public debut. He featured in Beethoven's concerto with Felix conducting. Away from concerts, Felix spent his time at Chester Place with young Felix Moscheles, who was becoming quite the artist. Together they practiced sketching. In other aspects, Felix Sr. enjoyed testing the boy on his Greek and Latin studies. Young Moscheles had a sharp mind, even when quizzed on the spot. On one occasion, while young Moscheles recited his language studies, Felix doodled on sketch paper. He began incorporating music into it, thinking it a good present for Ignaz. Klingman visited later in the day and came up with lines of poetry. Emily Moscheles wrote down his lines with her nice handwriting. When the late evening came, Felix presented the sketch to Ignaz, who found the page most amusing. Ignaz then tried to herd young Moscheles to bed, but the boy groaned as Felix sat at the piano. I don't want to go to bed. I want to hear Felix. All right, you can stay up, but only for a little bit, Ignaz allowed. Young Moscheles cheered and flopped on the sofa. Ignaz sat by Felix at the keys, and together they improvised various tunes. Young Moscheles savored every note, but it didn't last long. After one piece, Ignaz made the child retire for the night. Felix and Ignaz then continued on with a few tunes. After running through a piece of Handel, Ignaz informed Felix, "The Handel Society wants you to make a new edition of Handel's Messiah. A concert has been announced on the 1st of June. Felix nodded, then stated, "In addition, I want the music true to the score. If anything is added, it must be clear who intended what. I should have the thing prepared in due time," Felix continued at the keys, with a soft melody. It gave a soothing end to the night. On the 30th of May, Felix found himself taking a carriage to Buckingham Palace. Victoria and Albert invited him as soon as they heard that he was in London. Felix found them both in the drawing-room, organizing music of Albert's. Each work pleased Felix, making him give way to comments. "These are excellent. I must hear you play them." "Let us move to the music room." Victoria grabbed a few sheets. Albert took the rest, and Felix followed them to the music room. There they played all of the beautiful pieces. Felix watched with content, as the royal couple had such talent that wove together perfectly. Albert then told Felix, "Your turn." "All right." Felix went to the keys. He played a few sections of the Midsummer Night's Dream, then 2 songs without words. After that, Victoria joined with her voice in her favorite works, most of which happened to be Fanny's. Before it was Felix's time to go, he grabbed a book of music from his folder. "I've arranged 7 of my songs without words as a duet for you to play together." "Thank you, dear Mendelssohn," Victoria chimed. "But before we part, you and I must play one together." Of course, Felix gestured her to sit at the keys beside him. Victoria chose Spring Song. They played it beautifully. Albert daydreamed while watching his wife's pretty hands press the keys in grace. When it finished, Felix then mentioned, "I have a concert coming on the 10th of June, if you'd like to join. The orchestra is performing the incidental music to A Midsummer Night's Dream." "We shall," Albert became excited. Victoria questioned, "The play will be in the original English, I imagine?" "Of course," Felix nodded. "Now I bid you both farewell." He departed the palace in happiness. Days later, at the said concert, Felix conducted in a theater containing a packed audience. The music echoed well and made the sound all the more magical and majestic. Victoria and Albert took up seats in the center front row as any royals would. They were only 10 steps away from the pit where Felix counted the orchestra. Victoria enjoyed watching the play, while Albert, being a musician, rather found most of his attention towards Felix. He was intriguing to watch with his conducting gestures. His baton and outfit made him appear most professional. After the closing of the performance, the crowd gave way to yells, "Encore, encore!" The demands were relentless. Felix turned and noticed Victoria and Albert shouting along, so faced back to the orchestra and had the musicians replay a few of the most popular sections. The wedding march seemed to receive the best applause. Victoria was especially intrigued by it. She determined that when her children married in the future, the march would be an excellent choice of post-vow music. A month later, after much fun and success, Felix gathered his luggage to depart from England. Little Felix Moscheles helped him, but in sadness. Felix Sr. felt so disheartened as silent tears dripped from little Mocheles's cute face. "We will see each other again. You still have much to learn with drawing," Felix Sr. assured. The boy felt much better after being spoken to. Ignaz came and made sure nothing was left behind. He then informed Felix, "We shall not be parted too terribly long. Emily and I will be in Frankfurt in the autumn, as I have a concert." "Really?" Felix jumped in excitement. He then picked up his bags, now able to leave in satisfaction. The long trip back to Soden felt normal. A needed happiness and comfort was granted when he reunited with his family. When autumn came, Ignaz and Emily kept their word. They arrived in Frankfurt in September. Felix joined them at the concert house, crammed full of people excited to hear the music of Moscheles. While Ignaz and Emily were elsewhere warming up, Felix stood by a friend named Rosenhain. They watched as more and more people flooded into the auditorium. Felix felt worried and told Rosenhain, "What will Frankfurters say when they find no seats? Let us try to hire some chairs. Come along." Rosenhain followed Felix as he went in search of more chairs. It was no easy task. The concert house had no extra. They resorted to taking a carriage out to various hotels, but each was crowded, having none to spare. The last place they checked was a small inn, in which, to their luck, had 4 dozen chairs. Felix informed the landlord, "These must be sent to the concert house immediately." "But who is to pay?" inquired the landlord. "A great artist, Moscheles, who is giving a concert. It is all right, your money is safe." Felix grabbed a few chairs. The landlord called to him, "Stop a minute. These great artists often give concerts, pocket the money, and then disappear. I must have something down." Felix gave a sigh, setting down the chairs. Both he and Rosenhain emptied their pockets, which amounted to a little cash. The landlord took it and thankfully said, "On your way." "Vielen Dank." Felix and Rosenhain took what they could carry in their arms. They then stuffed the chairs outside of the carriage cab to hurry back to the concert house. With the extra chairs, everyone was able to find a seat, making the concert-goers comfortable and pleased with the music. Ignaz played at his best, and his daughter Emily joined him in a duet at the keys. It made for great success. On the way home, Emily sat next to Felix in the carriage cab, as he drew a sketch of the evening's go-abouts, doodling the chair stuffed in the cab. Emily noticed he quit the sketch with the horse unfinished. She pointed out, "You must draw in the horse." "I can't draw that by heart," Felix admitted, penning a few words and lines of music for Ignaz to read and remember. The carriage rode to the hotel where Ignaz took stay. There, the musicians from the concert greeted them in the lobby with a punch party set up. A piano was situated there as well. Both Ignaz and Felix were enticed to play spirited music. Most of the drinks happened to be passed to Felix. He played much Beethoven at the keys, each work sounding more drunk than the last. Through the hours, he guzzled down 212 glasses of punch, fortissimo. The night ended with a wonderful moonlight and singing in the street. By morning, Felix had a headache. 9, Felix gave a dry reply. His throat stung in sourness. It was the season of spring, and he had planned to make a trip to Leipzig to conduct his E minor violin concerto in its premiere. Just before making arrangements to leave from Frankfurt, Felix caught illness. "I am sorry, but you cannot travel. I fear fever is soon to set in," the doctor sighed. "You have caught a strain of the measles." "But this was the last day I could leave to make it in time. That concerto took me 6 years, and it's too late to postpone the concert. I feel fine right now. I can conduct." Felix sat up. The doctor made him lay back. 9, you are not leaving the bedroom. You will spread sickness, and a rash is already developing on your neck. He pointed out a redness on his throat. "Who is to conduct, then?" Felix scoffed. Cecil overheard and came into the room, asking, "Does not Herr David usually conduct the concertos?" "But this is a violin concerto. He plays violin," Felix stated in the obvious. He then huffed. "Get me some letter paper. I must write to Fernand." Cecil grabbed pen and paper. Felix viciously took it and wrote, explaining his situation. In his overwhelmed state, he gave way to a horrendous coughing fit. I sighed upon receiving Felix's letter. It had arrived the night of the concert. Sophie, my wife, knew I was not happy. After I took in the information, I told her, "I must go find a fill-in to conduct tonight. Hitler is away, and I am playing violin. It may be a challenge." I grabbed my coat and rushed out to the concert house. Musicians were here and there, preparing for the evening. I found no one I was looking for, so headed back outside. When exiting the main door, I coincidentally bumped into Niels Gade. In all my worry, he stopped and asked, "Everything all right?" 9, bitte. Can you conduct the concert tonight? Felix is ill." "Of course," Niels smiled.